Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our virtual communication webinar series. Our topic today is writing. Now, I should introduce myself. My name is Mark Thompson, and I've been a trainer here in Malaysia for 3 years, which means I have a very good understanding of the kind of mistakes that Malaysians make when they write emails. I'm also a certified English teacher, which means I understand the struggles that people have when they're writing in a language that isn't their native language. And finally, I have a master's degree in psychology from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And what that means is that I have a really good understanding of what goes on in people's minds when they're writing emails and also when they're receiving them. So it is my belief that if you follow the tips that I'm going to present in this webinar, your email communication is going to go much more smoothly. And what that means is there's going to be much fewer problems in your life. You're going to have a lot less stress that results from the problems of miscommunication through email. And this is really important because in the modern digital age, especially with Industry 4.0, email writing, email communication is going to become more and more the main way you communicate with people, especially when you're communicating across different teams, across different countries and different cultures. So you need to become very, very good at building relationships and building trust with people just through email, because you might never get a chance to meet them face to face. So let's get started with this. There are 3 main points that I want to focus on today. And they are 3 things that I want you to remember when you leave this webinar. The first thing is that your emails need to be clear and easy to understand. That means that both you and the person that you're writing to have to understand what your point is, what you're trying to get across. Okay. Next, you need to keep the email as short and simple as you can. Again, because when you're communicating digitally, if you overcomplicate things, then people aren't going to read everything. They're not going to understand it. They're going to get confused. Okay, and the last point, and this is probably the most important thing to remember, is that you need to remember that you need to sound like a human being and not a robot. And if you don't know what that means, you will by the end of this webinar. Okay, so I'm going to be speaking for approximately 30 minutes. If you have any questions, just put them into the chat. And at the end of the webinar, I will go through it and I will try to answer as many questions as I can. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start with point number 1, being clear and easy to understand. So the first thing you need to do if you're going to be clear in your writing is to have a clear purpose. You need to know why you're writing. You need to take some time before you start typing to think, okay, why am I writing this email? Okay, and the first question you need to ask yourself is, what do I want to happen? Okay, so this is starting from your own perspective. What do I want out of this? What am I trying to achieve? What's my goal? But in order to answer that question, you need to think about the other person, right? You need to know what they're going to do with the information, right? So this is the beginnings of empathy, putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So that's where the next question comes in. And that is, what do they need? So you really need to think of the other person, use your empathy, understand their perspective, and then understand their needs. And when you're writing, you can help address those needs. If you know what the other person wants, then you can put that into your email. And the last thing you need to worry about is, what do they expect? So what are they expecting you to write? How are they expecting you to write? What's the style that they're expecting? All right? Are they expecting you to be very friendly, or are they expecting you to be very formal? Are they expecting you to give them lots of information, or are they expecting you to get right to the point? And in order to answer that question, you need to understand your reader. Okay, so this is where building the relationship comes in. Okay, so there's some pretty difficult questions you need to ask to get a clear purpose. But once you have that, once you have an idea of what you're trying to achieve, then you need to think about, how am I going to structure and organize my email? And I'm going to show you a really cool way of doing that. So first thing you need to do is, I'd say, take a piece of paper, and in the middle of the piece of paper, put your purpose. Okay, then think of, okay, what's the first thing I need to write? What's the first bit of information I need to give? And you draw a line from your purpose and include that information. And the reason you draw a line is to remind you that it has to always relate to your purpose. Everything in your email has to relate to your purpose. Okay, then you think of your next thing you need to write, and then you realize, okay, I need to include more details, so draw a line, include your details. And you don't need to write anything long here. This can be point form. This is just for you. No one else ever needs to see this piece of paper. Okay, then maybe you think of a request that you need to make the other person. Think of another request, think of some details for the request. Okay, so this is basically the content of your email. And then what you're missing is you need to have an opening and a closing as well. Okay, so once you've come up with all this, you need to think of what you're going to include in your opening, what you're going to include in your closing. Now you can start to form things into paragraphs. So obviously the opening is going to be first. That's going to be your first paragraph. Then you look at the rest of it and you say, okay, what should go next? Well, let's say the first bit of info will be the next paragraph, and then the next info, and so on until you've got all your paragraphs. And this helps you sort the information. Okay, and the advantage of doing it in this way is it's non-linear, which means you didn't start off with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You started off with things in no particular order, and then you sorted them once you had all the information in front of you. And this works really well with the way your brain works. So you're going to come up with a much better email structure if you use this style. So the last thing you need to consider if you want to be clear and easy to understand is avoiding ambiguity. So I'm going to give you a minute, and in the chat, see if anyone can tell me what is wrong with these sentences here. And ambiguity can come from any number of different things. It can come from missing words. It can come from grammar mistakes. It can come from a lack of editing. It can come from not thinking about how you're going to write things. It can come from not reading through what you're writing. And it doesn't matter why it happens. The problem with this is if you write something that isn't clear, that's ambiguous, then the other person might never come back to you and ask you a question, ask you to explain what you meant by it, right? They might just make an assumption and say, oh, well, I guess in this case, I guess they meant the IC number, so that's what I'm going to focus on. But maybe what you really meant was the passport number. So hopefully you figured it out by now. And the problem was that you can't tell whether the IC number or the passport is the one missing the digit. Okay, and where this mistake probably came from is maybe the person wrote this and only originally wrote IC number and then later added in passport number but forgot to change the next sentence. This is where editing is really important. Okay, so this is just to give you the idea that how important it is to be clear and easy to understand. You can't have any ambiguity, you can't have any confusion. Okay, but if you focus too much on organizing and making things clear, then you can sometimes have a tendency to overcomplicate things, right? To make your email too long. So that's where our next section comes in. And that is where you need to keep things as short and simple as possible. I'm sure many of you have seen this acronym before, KISS. It's very easy to remember. It's not always so easy to do though. So I'm going to show you how you can functionally, practically keep it short and simple. So the first thing you need to do is think about what the other person needs to know. Do they need to know this? And in order to answer this, you need to ask yourself one question and follow one rule. So the rule is don't tell people things they already know. So I'll give you an example. We often use a case study in our training where you're writing to somebody who is organizing a conference in Germany. And what we find is a lot of people, when they write this, they'll include the name of the city, they'll include the name of the conference, they'll include the time of the conference, the place. This is all information that the conference organizer definitely already knows. You definitely do not need to tell the conference organizer this. I'm just going to turn that off. So hopefully that's better for the sound. So if you tell someone things they already know, then they might actually find that insulting because they might think you're treating them like they don't know things, like they're dumb. Okay, so you need to be careful about that. And the next thing you need to do is ask yourself the question, what are they going to do with that information? If you can answer that, then it's going to help you make a lot of decisions going forward, okay? Because if you know what they're going to do with the information, you know what to include. You know what key points to include, and you can cut everything else. You can cut all the things that aren't important to them. Okay, just because something's important to you doesn't mean it's important to your reader, and you need to remember that. Always try to remember to look at things from your reader's perspective. Okay, the next thing you need to do for keeping it short and simple is understand the relationship between the length of the email and how organized it needs to be. Okay, so it's a really easy thing to pay attention to. The longer the email, the more important it is that you organize it. The more important it is that you have a clear structure. Okay, and how can you do that? You can do that with lists. You can do that with numbers. You can do that with bullet points, headings, tables. It's up to you really which one you want to use. But if you've got a really long email, you can't just have one giant block of text. And there's reasons for that. A giant block of text, it's hard to read, it's hard to understand, it's easy to miss things. Also, when someone's replying to you, it's helpful if you've organized things so they can structure their reply more easily. If you've got a giant block of text and they want to only reply to part of it, it's hard for them to pull out that one part and make it clear what they mean. If you've got the points numbered, then they can say, I want to talk to you about point number 3 in particular. Okay? Now, the next thing you need to worry about is editing. This is the real key for keeping it short and simple, because often when you write, you've written this big long thing and it's too much. You realize, this is too much information, but it's not clear where you've gone wrong, what you can cut without making it unclear. So the first thing you want to do is read through the email. I can't tell you how many times it's been obvious that somebody sent me an email, but they haven't read through it, because there's a very, very obvious mistake in there that they missed. Okay, so you want to read through the email and you want to make sure that you haven't made any mistakes, that it's all correct. You also want to make sure that you've included everything, that it's all complete. Okay, the next thing you want to look through, as you're reading through it, you can look at the style. And what that means is, are you jumping back and forth between formal and informal style? Is it consistent? Are you making it cohesive? Does it flow together? Is it easy to read? Are you using linking words? Next up, I want to check your grammar. And you can use an online tool like Grammarly, but that's not going to be everything. That's not going to fix all your grammar mistakes. Okay, so you still need to read through it and check it yourself, or better yet, get someone else to check it for you, because you'll miss mistakes that you made, but if you get someone else to check, they'll notice your mistakes, hopefully. Next, you want to check your punctuation, and you can use this as an opportunity to check your sentence length. So sometimes an email can seem really long just because the sentences are too long. So a good rule of thumb is check your commas. If you've got a sentence with more than 3 commas, then your sentence is probably too long. Next up, you want to check your spelling. And obviously most word processors and email software is going to red underline your spelling mistakes, right? But we all know that that's not perfect, because for a lot of you, I'm sure it underlines your name. And we know that's not a spelling mistake. So anything like names, technical terms, jargon, or things in other languages, that's all going to come up as incorrect spelling. So you still need to check it yourself. Also, if you've misspelled a word and it looks like another word instead, the spell check's not going to notice that. So again, you still need to read it and check it yourself. And finally, the last thing you do before you are ready to send is you want to check your layout. So is it a big block of text? Have you used the organizational structures like lists and numbers and bullets and headings? Or is it, hard to read? Is it too small? Anything like that? Does it look professional? Have you used emotes or crazy colors or all caps or anything like that? You want to keep your emails professional, right? Okay, so we've talked about keeping it short and simple. We've talked about keeping it clear and easy to understand. Now, if you've only focused on that, then you've missed a step, because you might end up losing the human side of things if you just focus on these. And that's the next section. So this is the most important section. I'm probably going to spend the most time on this, because it's very important when you're communicating digitally, especially with people that you don't get to meet face to face, to sound like a human. So the first way that you can create a more human relationship with other people is to build rapport. And rapport means that you have a good connection with them, a good relationship, you like each other. So where can you build a rapport in an email? That sounds like a difficult thing to do, right? Well, it's not as easy as face-to-face, that's for sure. So you need to make more effort. Okay, and the first place that you want to focus on is your opening. So your opening in an email, this is your chance to talk about something other than just pure business. Okay, you can use your opening to refer to anything you have in common or anything that's happening in the world. Obviously, right now, One good opening is to ask how they're dealing with the coronavirus, how they're dealing with being locked down or working from home or whatever their situation is. Now, again, you have to be careful to be sensitive and not to offend people or make them depressed or anything like that. But focusing on what's going on, or if there's a holiday happening, or if there's a religious festival and you know they celebrate. These are all good things to include in the opening. Okay, but once you get to know them better, then your opening can get more specific to the other person and really start to build the relationship. And if you do this properly, you can have a sort of separate, informal conversation happening in your openings back and forth to each other. So for example, there's someone I correspond with who's very family-oriented, is really focused on her children. So in my emails to her, often the first line isn't about business, isn't about anything serious. It's about her kids. It's asking how her kids are doing, how her family is doing. And it's back and forth in that way, and we've built the relationship through email in that way. So that's how you build a relationship through email. You find out about the other person. Now, if you get a chance to talk to them face-to-face or over the phone, that's where you want to make sure you're asking them questions, you're finding out about them, you're finding information about them that you can then put into your emails. Okay, so find out what they care about, what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, and you include that where appropriate. You don't want to force it. If it seems unnatural, it's not going to work. Okay, so you want to be friendly in the same way you'd be friendly face-to-face. And lastly, the thing you need to consider is culture. So if you're writing to someone from a different culture, even if they're in the same country, you need to consider the differences between the way you write and the way you communicate and the way they write and they communicate. So different cultures are going to have different standards about things like politeness or things like punctuality or concepts of time or power structures or individualism or individual responsibility. There's many different dimensions of culture you need to be aware of. So you need to understand things like different festivals, different religions, different holidays even, and know that when you're writing to someone in a different culture, you should include that kind of information in your thinking that can help you then build the relationship. Okay, if you show someone you understand and appreciate their culture, then they're going to like you more. They're going to be more willing to share with you. Okay, so you've built the relationship, but at some level, it doesn't matter how well you build a relationship. If your opening sentence is very friendly and the rest of the email is very, very formal and unfriendly, that's not going to work very well. So I'm going to show you an example here. In this sentence, what would you say is the problem? Is it too formal? Is it old-fashioned? Or is it just fine? Is it a perfectly good email? So I'll read it to you. For your information, it has come to our attention that at this time we are unable to comply with your request. Kindly revert in the near future with regard to the forthcoming course of action to be taken. So, as some of you have probably noticed, there's a few words here that sort of jump out at you maybe as a bit too formal. So I'm going to go through it step by step. And the first thing that jumps out at me is for your information. This is the kind of phrase that has come into a lot of communication, but it doesn't really mean anything. Because if you're writing an email to someone, of course it's for their information. So again, do they need to know this? Are you telling them things they already know? Well, they already know that it's for their information, so you don't need to write that. And if you delete it, you can see the email is exactly the same. There's no difference in meaning here. Okay, the next thing I want to focus on, it has come to our attention. And this kind of phrase is implying that the information just came to you from somewhere else. It's much better to say something like, we noticed, or we note that, in order to show that you noticed it. There was an action, there was a person involved. Okay, it comes across as much more friendly and less formal to write like that. Next up, at this time. Instead of at this time, again, very formal, somewhat old-fashioned, I would say now or at the moment. Something like that, a little more modern in your writing. Next, we are unable to comply with your request. Now, the big problem word here is comply. Comply is the kind of word you would generally only use in a very serious situation. It's a very serious word. It's the kind of word that you'd see in a court summons. You must comply. Instead, you'd want to use something like, we are unable to grant your request, or you'd probably change the phrase completely. Okay, next up, kindly and revert. Both of these, I would say, in a modern context are being misused. When someone from a Western country sees the word kindly, what they think it means is nicely, like in a nice way. And what you really want to say here is please. As for revert, to revert means to put something back the way it used to be. So it doesn't mean reply, which is what the person means here. So when you want to write revert, you should usually write reply. Okay? In the near future, why not just say soon? It's simpler, it's shorter. If we're focusing on keeping it short and simple, it's also more modern. And with regard to, you just write regarding or concerning. And the forthcoming course of action to be taken. The problem with this, forthcoming, very, very formal. The course of action to be taken by who? Who's going to take the action and what is the action? And that is the big problem with a lot of formal writing. It's not specific enough. So in this case, we don't know what the issue is. We don't know what the request is. We don't know what the action that they're suggesting. And it's very much us and you, maybe us versus you. So we can't comply with your request, and we want to know what you want to do. We want to know the forthcoming course of action that you want to take. Why isn't this written in a more inclusive style? Okay, so I'll give you an example of how you could write this. So unfortunately, we're not able to fulfill your request at the moment. Please let us know what you would like to do next. So this is the same information. I didn't make this too inclusive. You could change this. So why don't we work together to find out what we should do next would be probably better. But the point is that if you write in this way, it comes across as much more friendly, much more personal. Because what you want to avoid, remember, is you don't want to sound like a robot. You don't want to sound like you're not a real person. Okay, and that is our last point that I want to focus on. So, sometimes when you write, it sounds no different than if it was generated by a computer. And I'll show you what I mean. So a robot might say, the application has been received. And what this shows is it's been received by who? We don't know. Nobody maybe. And the application, whose application? Okay, it's very, very impersonal. So if you wanted to write this in a more personal style, but say you're writing as a company, here's how you could do it. We have received your application. So when you're writing for the company, you use we, but it's even better than that because we're also saying your application instead of the application. So we're making it personal. Finally, if you're writing for yourself, and this is the most human style, the best style, if you can use this, if you're speaking for yourself, use I have received your application. Okay, it seems like a small change. It is really. It's a very small change, but it makes a big difference in your communication. If you use I, we, you, your, these kind of words are much more personal. It's much more the way you would speak. And this is the real key. If you want to speak like a human being, you want to write as closely as possible to the way you would speak to the person if they were in front of you face to face. Okay, if you reread your document, if you read your email, and it sounds like something you would never say, especially if you read it out loud to yourself, this is the best way to do it. If it sounds unnatural, then you probably need to change the way you've written it. It's probably not human enough. Okay, so, oops, sorry about that. Last thing, let's go back to the beginning. The 3 main points. You want to be clear and easy to understand. So that means you want to have a clear purpose. You want to use something like spider diagrams or some organizational system to make sure you're organizing your email properly. And you want to make sure you're avoiding ambiguity. Next, you want to keep it short and simple. And that means, remember the rule and the question. The rule, don't tell them things they already know. And the question, what are they going to do with the information? Finally, you want to edit. You want to make sure you're editing down the document to make sure that it is as simple and short as you can make it. Okay? And lastly, you want to sound like a human. So that means building rapport through things like opening, things like building the relationship, and being aware of culture and using culture to your advantage to build the relationship. Okay? You want to make sure you're not being too formal and too old-fashioned. You want to be more modern in your writing and try to be informal whenever you can. And lastly, probably the most important thing, use I, we, and you. So, if you like this information, if you want to get more detailed, because this is only 30 minutes, we could talk about these things for hours. And if you want your staff to improve at skills like email writing, I recommend our digital learning courses. So let me just briefly explain what I mean by that. So we've identified 3 main approaches to digital learning, and you can choose whichever of the 3 suits your needs. Okay, so you can sign up for one of them, or you can pick all 3 and use our complete digital learning package for the maximum return on your investment. So 3 approaches that we've identified. So you can do the LMS, which is online learning at your own pace. So this involves things like quizzes, games, videos, interactions, listening activities, and it's also very gamified. So you get points for completing activities, and you compete with other participants in a leaderboard. And you can easily get one-touch comprehensive reports that shows what your staff is doing on the LMS. Okay, we also do instructor-led sessions. So these are small group interactions, and they try to simulate the classroom experience. So it's a lot of group work and a lot of trainer feedback. So it's a chance to get some one-on-one feedback. So this pairs nicely with the LMS. So they're doing a lot of practice and learning on the LMS, and then they do the instructor-led sessions to really reinforce that learning. And finally, we have webinars just like this one, 30-minute bite size, easy to listen to, easy to understand, and we focus on soft skills and language, and we run these 4 times a month. So the 2 ways that your staff can do this. We've got business communication in English, which is a fully integrated blend of English and soft skills together, and this is 16 hours of face-to-face time and 2 months access to the LMS, plus 8 webinars because it's 2 months of webinars. Or you can do a soft skills course, which is focused on one particular soft skill. So for example, you could do just email writing as a soft skill course. And this would be 8 hours of face-to-face time plus 1 month of LMS and 1 month of webinar access. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for watching this webinar. We're pretty much out of time, but I will stick around to answer any questions that you have. So if anyone has any questions for me, I want you to just put them in the chat. I'll do my best to answer them as best as I can. But in any case, thank you so much. This has been really nice for me, actually, because it's a feeling like we're together with other people, which has been a rarity in these times. So I want to thank you for coming in and watching, and I wish you all the best.